Tonight, as you settle into the darkness of your room, I want to offer you something different. Not another meditation app promising instant peace, not another self-help guru demanding you optimize your sleep schedule. Instead, I want to share with you the most liberating ideas ever conceived by human minds. Ideas so profound, so fundamentally freeing, that they can untangle the knots of anxiety that keep you awake at night. What I'm about to share with you isn't just philosophy, it's a complete reframing of what it means to be alive, what it means to worry, and what it means to find peace in a universe that often feels overwhelming. These aren't abstract academic concepts discussed in dusty lecture halls. These are living, breathing insights that can transform how you experience every moment of your existence, especially those quiet hours when your mind refuses to rest. You see, most people approach sleep like they approach everything else in life, with resistance, with struggle, with the desperate need to control outcomes they were never meant to control. But what if I told you that the greatest philosophers throughout history discovered something remarkable? They found that true peace comes not from grasping tighter, but from letting go completely. Not from solving all your problems, but from understanding which problems are actually yours to solve. Tonight, we're going to explore ideas that have liberated minds for thousands of years. From the ancient Stoics who discovered the secret to unshakable tranquility, to Eastern wisdom traditions that revealed the illusion of the struggling self, to modern thinkers who showed us how to find meaning in an apparently meaningless universe. These aren't just intellectual curiosities, they're practical tools for freedom, disguised as philosophy. But here's what makes tonight different. We're not going to rush through these ideas like we're cramming for an exam. We're going to let them unfold slowly, naturally, the way profound truths should be received. We're going to explore them in that drowsy space between waking and sleeping, where the mind becomes most receptive to transformation. The first liberation I want to share with you tonight might sound counterintuitive, but it's perhaps the most important realization any human being can have. It's this: most of your suffering comes not from what happens to you, but from your resistance to what happens to you. This isn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. This is a recognition of how your mind actually works, and once you see it clearly, everything changes. Imagine your thoughts as clouds drifting across the sky of your consciousness. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control which clouds appear, getting frustrated when storm clouds gather, celebrating when the sun breaks through. But the sky itself remains unchanged, vast and open, whether it's filled with sunshine or thunder. Your awareness is like that sky. Thoughts and feelings arise and pass away naturally, but you are the spacious awareness in which they appear and disappear. This understanding comes from recognizing what philosophers call the difference between what is up to you and what is not up to you. Your thoughts, your reactions, your choices in this moment, these are up to you. The weather, other people's opinions, the past, the future, the basic conditions of human existence, these are not up to you. And here's the liberating part. Once you truly accept this distinction, you stop wasting energy fighting battles you can never win. Consider how much mental energy you spend each day worrying about things completely outside your control. The economy, politics, what people think of you, whether you'll get sick, whether your loved ones are safe, what will happen next week or next year. Your mind churns through these concerns as if thinking about them harder could somehow influence outcomes that were never yours to determine. But what if you could redirect all that wasted energy toward the one domain where you actually have power? Your responses, your attention, your choices in this present moment. This isn't about becoming passive or uncaring. It's about becoming strategically focused on where your influence actually exists. It's about discovering a kind of strength that comes from moving in harmony with reality rather than fighting against it. The ancient Stoic philosophers developed this insight into a complete philosophy of life. They observed that human beings suffer not from events themselves, but from their judgments about events. You don't suffer because you lost your job. You suffer because you tell yourself losing your job is terrible, catastrophic, a sign of personal failure. You don't suffer because someone criticized you. You suffer because you believe their criticism means you're fundamentally flawed. This might sound like mere wordplay, but it's actually pointing to something profound about the nature of human experience. Your emotional life is largely created by the stories you tell yourself about what's happening. And since you have the power to examine and change these stories, you have far more control over your inner state than you might realize. Let me give you a practical example. Tomorrow, something will probably happen that you don't want to happen. Maybe you'll be stuck in traffic, or receive disappointing news, or have a conflict with someone you care about. Your first instinct will be to resist this unwanted experience, to wish it weren't happening, to feel frustrated or angry or sad. But what if, instead, you could recognize this unwanted experience as an opportunity to practice freedom? What if you could say to yourself, "This is what's happening right now, and I don't have the power to change it, but I do have the power to choose how I relate to it. I can resist it and suffer twice, once from the event itself and once from my resistance to it. Or I can accept it as part of the natural flow of life and focus on how I want to respond." This acceptance doesn't mean becoming a doormat or giving up on creating positive change in your life. It means recognizing the difference between acceptance and approval, between letting go and giving up. You can accept that traffic exists while still choosing to leave earlier next time. You can accept that criticism hurts while still deciding whether the criticism contains useful information. The liberation comes from realizing that your peace of mind doesn't depend on external circumstances aligning perfectly with your preferences. It depends on your ability to maintain inner equilibrium regardless of what's happening around you. This is not a superhuman ability reserved for enlightened masters. It's a natural capacity that emerges when you stop fighting reality and start working with it. But here's where this philosophy becomes even more interesting. Once you stop wasting energy on futile resistance, you begin to notice something remarkable about the nature of experience itself. Thoughts arise and pass away naturally. Emotions build and then dissipate on their own. Even physical sensations are constantly changing, never remaining exactly the same from moment to moment. This constant flux is not a problem to be solved. It's the fundamental nature of being alive. You are not a solid, unchanging entity moving through a world of solid, unchanging objects. You are a dynamic process, a flowing river of consciousness, temporarily organized in a particular pattern, but always in motion, always changing, always becoming something new. Understanding this can be profoundly liberating, because it means that whatever you're experiencing right now, however difficult or uncomfortable, is not permanent. The anxiety that feels so solid and overwhelming is actually a collection of thoughts, sensations, and emotions that are already in the process of changing. You don't have to make them go away. They're already going away on their own. You just have to stop grasping them so tightly. This brings us to another profound insight from the philosophical tradition. The recognition that the self you think you are protecting, the ego that seems so solid and important, is actually much more fluid and constructed than you realize. Most of your mental suffering comes from defending an identity that doesn't exist in the way you think it does. You have a name, a history, preferences, opinions, roles you play in the world. But if you look carefully at your direct experience, you'll notice that what you call yourself is actually a constantly changing stream of sensations, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. There's no fixed, solid self at the center of this stream. There's just the streaming itself, the flowing river of consciousness that you mistake for a separate, solid entity. This doesn't mean you don't exist or that your life doesn't matter. It means you exist in a much more fluid, interconnected way than you typically realize. You are not separate from life. You are life expressing itself in a particular form. You are not having experiences. You are experience itself, temporarily organized in a human pattern. When this recognition begins to dawn, something shifts in your relationship to worry and anxiety. You realize that the self you've been so concerned about protecting is actually much more resilient and much less solid than you thought. You begin to hold your identity more lightly, with a kind of playful curiosity rather than desperate attachment. This lightness doesn't make you careless or irresponsible. If anything, it makes you more effective because you're no longer wasting energy defending something that doesn't need defending. You can respond to life's challenges from a place of openness rather than contraction, creativity rather than fear, love rather than self-protection. As we continue this exploration tonight, we'll discover how this fundamental shift in understanding changes everything about how you relate to sleep, to rest, to the quiet moments when your mind usually races with worry. We'll explore how the greatest thinkers throughout history found peace not by solving all their problems, but by understanding the nature of problems themselves. The profound shift we've been exploring opens up an even deeper territory of liberation. As these insights settle into your awareness like sediment finding its natural resting place, you begin to discover something that might surprise you. The very mechanism of worry, the mental process that keeps you tossing and turning night after night, operates according to patterns that become transparent once you understand them. Your worried mind believes it's protecting you by rehearsing future disasters, analyzing past mistakes, constructing elaborate scenarios of what might go wrong. But here's what's remarkable. This protective mechanism is actually built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how time works. Your mind treats the future as if it were as real and immediate as the present moment, creating elaborate stories about events that exist only as mental constructions. Think about this carefully. Every worry you've ever had about the future was experienced entirely in the present. The anxiety, the racing thoughts, the physical tension, all of it happened now, in response to imaginary events. You've never actually worried about tomorrow. You've only worried about your thoughts about tomorrow, and those thoughts exist only in this moment. This recognition reveals something extraordinary about the nature of psychological suffering. You cannot actually suffer in the future because the future never arrives. When what you call the future becomes the present, you meet it with whatever awareness and resources you have in that moment. But the suffering you create now by thinking about potential future problems serves no practical purpose. It doesn't prepare you for anything real. It only depletes your energy and clouds your judgment. The same principle applies to regret about the past. You cannot suffer in the past because the past no longer exists. When you replay old conversations, relive past mistakes, torture yourself with thoughts of what you should have done differently, all of that suffering is happening now, in response to memories that exist only as present moment mental activity. This doesn't mean you can't learn from the past or prepare for the future. It means you can do both of these things much more effectively when you're not lost in psychological time, when you're present with what's actually here. Planning is a present moment activity. Learning from experience is a present moment activity. But worrying and regret are forms of mental time travel that keep you from engaging skillfully with the only moment where life actually happens. As this understanding deepens, you begin to notice how much of your mental activity is devoted to maintaining what philosophers call the narrative self. This is the story you tell yourself about who you are, where you've been, where you're going, what you need to accomplish to be happy or successful or worthy of love. This narrative feels incredibly important, but it's actually a kind of mental overlay on your direct experience of being alive. The narrative self is always either celebrating past victories or mourning past defeats, either anticipating future achievements or dreading future failures. It rarely participates in the simple fact of existing right now. And because this storytelling mind is so active, so convincing, so apparently necessary, you rarely experience the peace that's available when the narrative temporarily quiets down. But sometimes, unexpectedly, the story stops. Maybe you're watching a sunset, or listening to music, or absorbed in some activity that captures your complete attention. In these moments, you're still here, still aware, still experiencing, but the narrator has gone quiet. There's no one commenting on the experience, evaluating it, comparing it to other experiences, worrying about how long it will last. There's just the pure fact of awareness itself, open and present, and effortlessly at peace. These moments reveal something crucial. Your well-being doesn't depend on the content of your story. It doesn't depend on having the right thoughts, the right circumstances, the right future prospects. Peace is your natural state when you're not actively creating psychological suffering through mental commentary about what's wrong with now. This recognition leads to one of the most liberating realizations in all of philosophy. You don't have to wait for your life to get better to experience peace. You don't have to solve all your problems, achieve all your goals, or figure everything out before you can rest. Peace is not something you create by arranging external conditions properly. It's something you discover by stopping the mental activities that obscure it. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this deeply. They developed practices not to create enlightenment or peace or happiness, but to remove the obstacles to what was already present. They recognized that suffering is something we add to our experience through resistance, through trying to make reality different from what it is, through believing thoughts that have no basis in present moment truth. Consider how this applies to your relationship with sleep. Most sleep problems are not really about sleep. They're about the mind's resistance to whatever's happening right now. You lie in bed, thinking about tomorrow's challenges, replaying today's conversations, worrying about whether you'll get enough rest. The more you resist being awake, the more awake you become. The more you demand that sleep arrive on your schedule, the more elusive it becomes. But sleep, like peace, cannot be forced. It emerges naturally when conditions are right, when the mind stops its effortful activity and allows the body's natural rhythms to take over. This happens not through trying harder, but through trying less. Not through controlling your experience, but through welcoming whatever experience arises. This welcoming attitude extends far beyond sleep into every area of life. When you stop fighting with reality, when you stop insisting that your experience be different from what it is, something remarkable happens. You discover that most situations are much more workable than your resistance to them suggested. Problems that seemed insurmountable when you were fighting them become manageable when you approach them with acceptance and curiosity. This doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. It means approaching challenges from a place of inner stability rather than inner conflict. When you're not at war with your experience, you have access to creativity, wisdom, and resources that are unavailable when you're in resistance mode. You can respond to difficulties rather than react to them. You can make choices based on clarity rather than fear. The philosophers who discovered these truths weren't trying to create a philosophy of sleep. They were investigating the deepest questions of human existence. What does it mean to live well? How can we find peace in an uncertain world? What is the nature of suffering, and how can it be transcended? But their discoveries apply perfectly to the struggle with sleeplessness, because insomnia is often just a concentrated version of the resistance that creates suffering in all areas of life. When you understand that your essential nature is awareness itself, spacious and open and naturally at peace, you begin to relate differently to all the temporary phenomena that arise within that awareness. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, they all become like clouds passing through an open sky. Sometimes the weather is pleasant, sometimes it's stormy, but the sky itself remains untroubled. This metaphor isn't just poetic, it points to something you can directly experience. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's an awareness present that's receiving these ideas. That awareness isn't anxious or worried or trying to figure anything out. It's simply present, open, naturally peaceful. The anxiety and worry, when they arise, are objects appearing within this awareness, not characteristics of the awareness itself. As you begin to identify more with this spacious awareness and less with the temporary thoughts and emotions that arise within it, you discover a kind of freedom that doesn't depend on circumstances. You realize that you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're not even your personal history. You are the conscious presence in which all of these phenomena appear and disappear. This recognition dissolves many of the mental habits that interfere with natural rest. You stop taking your thoughts so seriously. Stop believing that every worry deserves your immediate attention. Stop assuming that uncomfortable emotions are emergencies that must be fixed right away. You learn to let experience be what it is, knowing that everything changes, everything passes, everything returns to the peace that was never actually disturbed. The great philosophical traditions offer us this gift, the understanding that we are already what we're seeking. We don't need to become peaceful. We need to recognize the peace that's already here. We don't need to eliminate thoughts and emotions. We need to understand their temporary nature and stop deriving our identity from them. We don't need to perfect our circumstances. We need to discover the freedom that exists, regardless of circumstances. This freedom is your birthright, your natural inheritance as a conscious being. It's not something you earn through spiritual practices or philosophical study, though these can help you recognize it. It's not something that depends on having the right teacher or the right technique or the right understanding. It's the very ground of your being, as intimate as your own breath, as immediate as this moment. Tonight, as this understanding begins to settle into your bones, you might notice something shifting in the very quality of your attention. Where there was once a grasping, urgent quality to your thoughts, there's now a growing sense of spaciousness. Where there was once resistance to whatever was arising in your experience, there's now a gentle curiosity about what's actually here. This shift isn't something you need to manufacture or force. It happens naturally when you stop feeding the mental patterns that create struggle. It's like when you've been clenching your jaw without realizing it, and suddenly you become aware of the tension and simply let it go. The relief is immediate, not because you've solved some complex problem, but because you've stopped creating an unnecessary problem. The beauty of this recognition extends into every corner of your existence. Consider how you typically approach an ordinary day. You wake up already thinking about what needs to be accomplished, what problems need solving, what goals need pursuing. Your mind immediately begins constructing a narrative about the day ahead, complete with expectations, worries, and elaborate scenarios of how things should unfold. But what if you could meet each day like a child encountering snow for the first time? With that same quality of wonder, that same absence of predetermined conclusions about what the experience should be. Children don't wake up worried about whether they'll have a good day or a bad day. They simply open their eyes and discover what's here. This childlike openness doesn't require you to become naive or unprepared. It's actually a more intelligent way of engaging with life because it allows you to respond freshly to each situation, rather than filtering everything through old patterns of expectation and fear. When you're not busy defending preconceived notions about how life should be, you become available to how life actually is. The philosophical tradition has a beautiful term for this quality of engagement: beginner's mind. It's the recognition that no matter how much you think you know about yourself, about others, about how the world works, each moment offers something genuinely new. The conversation you have with your spouse tonight has never happened before. The sunset you witness tomorrow has never been seen by anyone in exactly that way. The breath you're taking right now is utterly unique in the history of the universe. When you approach experience with this freshness, something remarkable happens to the mental commentary that usually accompanies your days. The voice in your head that's constantly evaluating, comparing, judging, planning, begins to quiet down. Not because you've forced it to be quiet, but because it has less material to work with. It thrives on the familiar, on repetitive patterns of thought and reaction. When you meet each moment with genuine openness, that voice finds itself with nothing to say. This quieting of mental commentary reveals layers of reality that are usually obscured by psychological noise. You begin to notice the extraordinary richness of ordinary experience. The taste of water becomes fascinating. The feeling of air on your skin becomes a source of subtle pleasure. The sound of your own breathing becomes as interesting as any music. This isn't about becoming overly sensitive or precious about simple experiences. It's about recognizing that the world you inhabit is far more vibrant and alive than your thinking mind usually acknowledges. When you're not lost in mental stories about the past and future, the present moment reveals itself to be inexhaustibly rich. The ancient philosophers called this quality of attention presence, but they understood it not as a technique to be practiced, but as your natural state when you're not actively disturbing it. Presence isn't something you achieve. It's something you are when you stop trying to be somewhere else, someone else, or someone else. This recognition has profound implications for how you relate to the challenges and difficulties that are inevitable in any human life. Instead of seeing problems as obstacles to your peace and happiness, you begin to see them as invitations to discover the depth of your own resilience and wisdom. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "How is this experience an opportunity to practice freedom?" This shift in questioning changes everything. When you're asking why difficult things happen, you're positioning yourself as a victim of circumstances beyond your control. You're implying that your well-being depends on life treating you fairly, on getting what you want when you want it, on avoiding pain and discomfort. This position guarantees suffering because life has never promised to conform to your preferences. But when you ask how each experience can deepen your understanding of freedom, you're positioning yourself as a student of reality, rather than a victim of it. You're acknowledging that every situation, pleasant or unpleasant, contains teachings about the nature of existence and your capacity to remain open and responsive, regardless of circumstances. This doesn't mean adopting a spiritual bypass attitude where you pretend difficulties don't matter or affect you. It means developing what the philosophers called equanimity, the ability to remain balanced and present, whether you're experiencing pleasure or pain, success or failure, praise or criticism. Equanimity isn't emotional numbness, it's emotional maturity. It's the recognition that your deepest well-being doesn't rise and fall with the changing conditions of your life. The cultivation of equanimity reveals something beautiful about the nature of human resilience. You are far stronger than you typically realize, not because you can control what happens to you, but because you can remain centered and responsive no matter what happens to you. This strength isn't something you have to build or develop. It's something you uncover by removing the mental habits that obscure it. Think about the people you most admire, the ones who seem to possess a quality of unshakable peace regardless of their circumstances. What you're recognizing in them is not some special ability they've developed, but their willingness to be authentically present with whatever life brings them. They haven't learned to avoid difficulty. They've learned to meet difficulty with an open heart. This open-heartedness is perhaps the most radical aspect of philosophical liberation. Instead of protecting yourself from life's uncertainties and challenges, you learn to embrace them as expressions of the same creative force that brings you moments of joy and beauty. You begin to see that resistance to unwanted experiences is what creates suffering, not the experiences themselves. When this understanding really takes root, it transforms your relationship not just to major life challenges, but to the smallest irritations and inconveniences. The traffic jam becomes an opportunity to practice patience. The rude cashier becomes a chance to respond with kindness, rather than react with frustration. The sleepless night becomes an invitation to explore the peace that exists even when the mind is active. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's not about achieving some perfect state where you never feel frustrated or worried again. It's about developing the capacity to recognize these reactions when they arise, and to hold them with compassion rather than resistance. It's about learning to be gentle with yourself as you discover new ways of engaging with the inevitable challenges of being human. The gentleness is crucial, because the mind that's been conditioned to struggle and resist doesn't transform through force or harsh self-discipline. It transforms through kindness, through patient understanding, through the recognition that all your attempts to control and manipulate your experience have come from a sincere desire to be happy and peaceful. As you begin to treat yourself with this kind of compassion, something beautiful happens. The harsh inner critic that's been commenting on your every move begins to soften. The voice that's been telling you you're not doing enough, not progressing fast enough, not spiritual enough, not peaceful enough, begins to quiet down. In its place arises a quality of warm acceptance that doesn't depend on your performance or achievements. This acceptance creates the optimal conditions for the natural unfolding of peace and wisdom. When you stop demanding that your experience be different from what it is, when you stop judging yourself for having human thoughts and emotions, when you stop trying to force yourself into some idealized state of consciousness, your nervous system begins to relax at the deepest level. This relaxation isn't just physical, though you'll certainly notice your body releasing tension you didn't even know you were carrying. It's a psychological and spiritual relaxation, a letting go of the enormous effort it takes to maintain the illusion that you need to be someone other than who you are right now. The philosophers throughout history who discovered these truths weren't superhuman beings who transcended all difficulty and challenge. They were ordinary people who learned to relate to their humanity with wisdom and compassion. They discovered that freedom doesn't come from escaping the human condition, but from embracing it fully, from finding the sacred within the ordinary, the eternal within the temporary. This discovery is available to you right now, not as a future achievement, but as a present recognition. The peace you're seeking isn't somewhere else, waiting for you to find the right technique or have the right insight or reach the right level of spiritual development. It's here in this moment, as the very awareness that's receiving these words, the very consciousness that's capable of recognizing its own nature. As we continue this gentle exploration, we'll discover how this fundamental shift in understanding changes your relationship not just to sleep and rest, but to every aspect of your daily life. We'll explore how the great wisdom traditions learned to find extraordinary meaning and peace within the most ordinary circumstances, and how their discoveries can illuminate your own path toward lasting freedom. The recognition we've been exploring together tonight opens into territory that might surprise you with its practical simplicity. As these philosophical insights begin to permeate your understanding, you discover that the most profound truths are often the most immediately applicable to your daily experience. The ancient wisdom we've been uncovering isn't meant to remain abstract or theoretical. It's designed to transform how you meet each moment of your actual life. Consider what happens when you truly internalize the understanding that your essential nature is spacious awareness, rather than the collection of thoughts and emotions that arise within it. This isn't just a nice idea to contemplate, it's a lived reality that changes everything about how you navigate ordinary challenges. When your teenager slams their bedroom door, when your boss sends that passive-aggressive email, when you receive unexpected bad news, You have a choice that most people don't even realize exists. You can identify completely with your immediate emotional reaction, becoming the anger or fear or disappointment. Or you can recognize these emotions as temporary weather patterns moving through the vast sky of your awareness. The emotion is still there, still felt, still honored, but it's not mistaken for your identity. You are the one aware of anger, not anger itself. You are the one experiencing fear, not fear itself. This distinction might sound subtle, but it's the difference between being swept away by every emotional storm and maintaining a kind of inner stability that allows you to respond wisely rather than react automatically. It's the difference between spending your days at the mercy of your psychological weather and discovering that you have access to an inner climate that remains fundamentally peaceful, regardless of what's happening on the surface. The beauty of this understanding is that it doesn't require you to suppress or eliminate difficult emotions. In fact, it allows you to feel them more fully because you're not simultaneously fighting them. When you know that you are the spacious awareness in which emotions arise and pass away, you can afford to let them be exactly what they are without needing to fix them, change them, or make them last longer or shorter than they naturally do. This brings us to one of the most liberating discoveries in all of human psychology: the recognition that emotions, like everything else in experience, are self-liberating when left alone. Anger naturally transforms into clarity when you don't feed it with repetitive thoughts. Sadness naturally opens into compassion when you don't resist it. Fear naturally reveals the precious vulnerability that makes love possible when you don't try to armor yourself against it. The problem is that most of us have never learned to leave emotions alone. We've been conditioned to immediately do something about every feeling that arises. If we feel anxious, we need to figure out what's wrong and fix it. If we feel sad, we need to cheer ourselves up or distract ourselves. If we feel angry, we need to either express it or suppress it. But what if there's a third option that's more intelligent than either expression or suppression? What if you could simply be present with emotional energy as it moves through your system, neither pushing it away nor getting lost in the stories that usually accompany it? What if you could experience fear without immediately believing all the thoughts fear generates about what might go wrong? What if you could feel sadness without constructing elaborate narratives about why your life is terrible? This capacity to be present with emotion without being overwhelmed by it is not something you need to develop through years of meditation practice. It's something you can discover right now by shifting your attention from the content of your emotional experience to the awareness that's having the experience. Right now, whatever you're feeling, there's something present that's aware of that feeling. That awareness itself is never disturbed by what it's aware of. Think of it this way. When you're watching a movie, you might feel scared during a horror scene or sad during a tragic moment, but the movie screen itself is never damaged by what's projected onto it. Your awareness is like that screen, naturally capable of receiving any experience without being harmed or fundamentally altered by it. The movie ends, the screen remains, the emotion passes, the awareness remains. This metaphor points to something you can verify in your own direct experience. Right now, pause for a moment and notice that you're aware. Don't think about awareness, simply notice that it's present. Now notice that this awareness has a quality of openness and peace that doesn't depend on what you're aware of. Whether you're aware of comfortable thoughts or uncomfortable thoughts, pleasant sensations or unpleasant sensations, the awareness itself remains spacious and untroubled. This recognition is the foundation of all genuine spiritual freedom, not because it's a belief or philosophy you adopt, but because it's a truth about your own nature that you can discover and verify for yourself. You don't have to take anyone's word for it. You can explore it directly right now, in your own immediate experience. As this understanding stabilizes, something remarkable happens to your relationship with difficulty. Challenges don't disappear from your life, but your relationship to them transforms completely. Instead of experiencing problems as threats to your peace and happiness, you begin to experience them as opportunities to discover the depth of your own unshakable nature. This isn't about developing a positive attitude or trying to see the good in everything. It's about recognizing that your deepest well-being was never actually threatened by external circumstances in the first place. The peace you're seeking isn't something fragile that needs to be protected from life's inevitable ups and downs. It's something so fundamental to your nature that it can't be disturbed, only temporarily overlooked. When you really understand this, you begin to approach difficulties with a kind of curious interest rather than desperate resistance. You might find yourself thinking, I wonder how I'll discover my freedom in this situation, rather than, why is this happening to me? This shift in perspective changes everything about how you move through challenging periods. Consider what this means for your relationship with physical discomfort. Most people experience pain as an enemy to be defeated, a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. But what if pain is actually a teacher showing you something important about the nature of embodied existence? What if the resistance to pain creates more suffering than the pain itself? This doesn't mean becoming masochistic or ignoring genuine medical needs. It means discovering that your capacity to remain present and open-hearted even in the midst of physical discomfort is far greater than you typically realize. It means learning to meet pain with curiosity rather than panic, with gentleness rather than violence. The same principle applies to psychological discomfort. Anxiety, depression, grief, loneliness, these difficult emotional states lose much of their power to overwhelm you when you stop treating them as emergencies that must be fixed immediately. When you can be present with difficult emotions without immediately trying to make them go away, you often discover that they have important information to offer about what you need or what you value. Anxiety, for instance, often arises when you're not living in alignment with your deepest values or when you're trying to control outcomes that aren't actually under your control. Instead of just trying to eliminate anxiety, you can use it as a signal to examine whether you're focusing your energy in directions that actually serve your well-being. Depression often emerges when you've been disconnected from sources of genuine meaning and connection for too long. Instead of seeing it only as a chemical imbalance to be corrected, you can explore what it might be trying to tell you about the quality of your life and relationships. This approach to difficult emotions requires a fundamental shift from the medical model that treats all psychological discomfort as pathology to be eliminated. While medical intervention is sometimes necessary and helpful, there's also wisdom in recognizing that some forms of psychological distress are actually intelligent responses to unintelligent circumstances. If you're anxious because you're living in a way that violates your deepest values, the problem isn't the anxiety, it's the misalignment. If you're depressed because you've been disconnected from meaningful relationships and activities, the problem isn't the depression, it's the disconnection. The emotional distress is actually trying to help you recognize where your life needs attention. This perspective doesn't diminish the reality of psychological suffering or suggest that people should just think their way out of serious mental health challenges. It offers a complementary understanding that can be profoundly helpful for many people. The recognition that you are larger than your psychological states, that your essential nature is not damaged by temporary experiences of difficulty, and that challenging emotions often contain intelligence about how to live more authentically. As you begin to relate to your emotional life with this kind of wisdom and compassion, you naturally begin to extend the same understanding to others. You start to see that everyone you encounter is doing their best to navigate the inherent challenges of human existence. The person who cuts you off in traffic isn't evil. They're probably stressed or distracted or dealing with difficulties you know nothing about. This recognition doesn't make you naive or passive in the face of genuinely harmful behavior. It makes you more skillful in your responses because you're not adding unnecessary layers of personal reactivity to already challenging situations. You can set boundaries, protect yourself, and even take strong action when necessary, but you can do all of this from a place of clarity rather than emotional reactivity. The philosophers called this quality of response wisdom in action. It's the capacity to meet each situation with the response that's most helpful rather than the response that's most emotionally satisfying in the moment. Sometimes wisdom looks like fierce compassion, sometimes like gentle acceptance, sometimes like clear boundaries, sometimes like patient understanding. What determines the wisest response isn't a set of rules or moral principles that you apply mechanically. It's your capacity to remain present and open-hearted in each unique situation, allowing the appropriate response to arise naturally from your deepest understanding of what serves the well-being of all concerned. This wisdom doesn't come from accumulating more knowledge or developing better strategies for managing your life. It comes from the recognition that you already have access to everything you need to respond skillfully to whatever arises. The wisdom isn't something you acquire, it's something you are when you're not obscuring it with mental noise and emotional reactivity. Think about moments in your life when you've responded to challenges with surprising wisdom and grace. Maybe it was during a family crisis when everyone else was panicking, or during a difficult conversation when you somehow found exactly the right words to say, or during a period of loss when you discovered reserves of strength you didn't know you had. In those moments, you weren't drawing on techniques you'd learned or strategies you'd developed. You were accessing the natural intelligence that emerges when you're fully present with what is. This natural intelligence is always available, not as something separate from you that you need to connect with, but as your very nature when it's not obscured by the mental habits that create psychological suffering. The more you recognize this, the more you begin to trust your capacity to meet whatever life brings with appropriate wisdom and skill. The trust that develops through this understanding is not naive optimism about how life will unfold. It's confidence in your ability to remain present and responsive, regardless of how life unfolds. It's the recognition that you don't need to know what's going to happen next in order to be okay right now. You don't need to have all your problems solved in order to access the peace and wisdom that are your birthright as a conscious being. This trust allows for a quality of relaxation that goes far deeper than mere physical comfort. It's a relaxation into existence itself, a letting go of the enormous effort it takes to try to control outcomes that were never yours to control. When you really trust that you can meet whatever arises with presence and wisdom, you stop wasting energy on futile attempts to manage the unmanageable. This deeper relaxation is what creates the optimal conditions for natural rest and restoration. When your nervous system isn't constantly activated by resistance to what is and anxiety about what might be, it can finally settle into its natural rhythm of activity and rest, engagement and renewal, waking and sleeping. The philosophers who discovered these truths understood that genuine peace is not the absence of activity or challenge. It's the presence of awareness that remains untroubled, regardless of what it's aware of. This peace is available not as a future achievement, but as a present recognition. Not as something you create, but as something you are when you stop creating unnecessary suffering through resistance to reality. As we continue our exploration together, you might notice this peace beginning to reveal itself more clearly, not as something foreign or exotic, but as something utterly familiar and intimate. It's been here all along, as close as your own breath, as immediate as this moment, waiting patiently for you to stop looking everywhere else and recognize what has never been absent. Tonight, as this recognition continues to deepen, you begin to discover something that might transform your entire relationship with the quiet hours of darkness. The understanding we've been exploring reveals itself not as abstract philosophy, but as immediate practical wisdom that applies directly to those moments when your mind refuses to let you rest. You see, the very mechanism that keeps you awake at night operates according to the same principles of resistance and identification we've been examining. When you lie in bed and your mind starts racing through tomorrow's concerns, replaying today's conversations, constructing elaborate scenarios of potential problems, what's actually happening is a fundamental misunderstanding of your relationship to thought itself. Most people believe they are their thoughts, that the voice in their head commenting on everything is somehow the real them. But what if that's not true? What if you are actually the spacious awareness in which thoughts arise and pass away, like sounds echoing in a vast canyon? The canyon itself is never disturbed by the sounds that move through it, no matter how loud or chaotic they might be. This realization changes everything about how you approach those restless nights. Instead of fighting with your thoughts, trying to force them to be quiet, or getting frustrated when they refuse to cooperate, you can simply recognize them as temporary phenomena arising in your awareness. You don't have to engage with every thought that appears. You don't have to solve every problem your mind presents. You can simply let them be there without giving them the energy of your complete attention. Think about how exhausting it is to wrestle with thoughts all night long. You engage with one worry trying to solve it or push it away, only to have 3 more arise in its place. It's like trying to calm turbulent water by hitting it with your hands. The more you struggle, the more agitated everything becomes. But what if you could be like the depths of the ocean, naturally still and peaceful, even when storms rage on the surface? This capacity for inner stillness doesn't require you to become emotionally numb or intellectually passive. You can still care deeply about your life and the people you love. You can still make plans and solve problems and engage fully with your responsibilities. But you can do all of this from a place of fundamental peace rather than anxious struggle. The ancient wisdom traditions understood something profound about the nature of rest. They recognized that true rest isn't just the absence of physical activity, it's the absence of psychological resistance. When you stop fighting with reality, when you stop demanding that your experience be different from what it is, your entire system can finally relax at the deepest level. This relaxation happens naturally when you recognize that most of what you think you need to control or figure out tonight isn't actually urgent. The problems that seem so pressing in the darkness often reveal themselves to be much more manageable in the light of day when you're well rested and thinking clearly. But even more importantly, you begin to understand that your peace of mind doesn't depend on having all your problems solved. Consider how often you've stayed awake worrying about something that either never happened or turned out to be much less significant than you imagined. Your mind creates elaborate disaster scenarios that exist only in the realm of possibility, then responds to these imaginary events as if they were immediate threats. But the future you're worried about exists only as a mental construction happening right now. This recognition allows you to relate to future concerns with a kind of gentle curiosity, rather than desperate urgency. You can acknowledge that yes, there are challenges ahead that will require your attention and skill, but you can meet them most effectively when you're rested and present, rather than exhausted from staying up all night, rehearsing solutions to problems that may never materialize. The same principle applies to regrets about the past that often surface during quiet nighttime hours, the conversations you wish you'd handled differently, the opportunities you think you missed, the mistakes you made that still cause you pain. All of this psychological suffering is happening now, in response to memories that exist only as present moment mental activity. You cannot change what happened in the past, but you can change your relationship to the memories. Instead of allowing them to trigger the same patterns of guilt and regret night after night, you can recognize them as thoughts arising in present moment awareness. The past they refer to is gone, only your current thinking about it remains, and that thinking, like all thoughts, is temporary and impersonal. This doesn't mean dismissing lessons learned from past experiences or avoiding responsibility for your actions. It means recognizing the difference between learning from the past and torturing yourself with it. Learning happens naturally when you're present and open. Self-torture happens when you identify completely with the voice in your head that insists on replaying old stories of failure and inadequacy. As you begin to hold both future concerns and past regrets more lightly, something remarkable happens to the quality of your nighttime experience. The urgency that usually accompanies these thoughts begins to dissolve. You start to recognize that most of what your mind presents as requiring immediate attention can actually wait until morning when you're fresh and clear. This shift creates space for a different kind of relationship with the quiet hours of night. Instead of seeing them as a battleground where you must defeat your thoughts in order to achieve sleep, you can experience them as an opportunity to practice the art of gentle presence. The thoughts may still arise, but you don't have to consciously engage with everyone that appears. Imagine your awareness as a vast night sky, and your thoughts as stars that appear and disappear in that sky. The sky itself is never crowded or overwhelmed by the stars, no matter how many appear. It provides infinite space for whatever arises without being diminished or disturbed by it. You can rest as this spacious awareness, allowing thoughts to twinkle into existence and fade away without needing to do anything about them. This metaphor points to something you can experience directly right now. As you listen to these words, notice that there's a quality of awareness present that's receiving them. That awareness has room for these ideas, for whatever emotions they might evoke, for any other thoughts that might arise simultaneously. It's naturally spacious and accommodating, never struggling to fit everything in. This same spacious awareness is available during those hours when sleep seems elusive. You can rest in it even when your mind is active, finding peace not through the absence of mental activity, but through the recognition that you are the peaceful space in which all mental activity arises and subsides. The practical application of this understanding is beautifully simple. When you notice your mind spinning through worries and concerns, instead of trying to stop the spinning, you can gently shift your attention to the awareness that's noticing the spinning. This isn't a technique to practice, it's a recognition of what's already here. The peaceful awareness doesn't need to be created or achieved, it just needs to be acknowledged. This acknowledgement happens naturally when you stop trying so hard to manage your internal experience. Most sleep difficulties are actually caused by the effort to control thoughts and emotions, rather than by the thoughts and emotions themselves. It's the resistance that creates the problem, not the mental activity you're resisting. When you truly understand this, you can lie in bed with a racing mind and still be at peace. Not because you've successfully quieted the mind, but because you've recognized that your peace doesn't depend on mental quietness. You are the unchanging awareness in which both quiet minds and busy minds appear. Either state is perfectly fine because neither one affects your essential nature. This recognition extends beyond nighttime rest into every area of your daily life. You begin to approach challenges and difficulties with the same quality of spacious presence. Problems don't disappear from your life, but your relationship to them transforms completely. Instead of being overwhelmed by every obstacle, you can meet each situation from a place of inner stability. The philosophers throughout history who discovered these truths weren't people who lived lives free of difficulty and challenge. They were ordinary human beings who learned to find extraordinary peace within ordinary circumstances. They discovered that freedom doesn't come from having perfect conditions, but from recognizing the perfection that's already present in your capacity to be aware, to be present, to respond with wisdom and compassion, regardless of what's happening around you. This freedom is immediately available because it's not something you achieve in the future, it's something you recognize right now. The awareness that's reading these words, that's capable of understanding these ideas, that's present even when you're not thinking about it, this awareness is naturally free, naturally peaceful, naturally whole. You don't have to wait until you've mastered some spiritual practice or resolved all your psychological issues or created perfect life circumstances to access this freedom. It's here now, as intimate as your own breath, as immediate as this moment, as available as your willingness to recognize what has never actually been absent. As you continue to explore this recognition, you might find that the whole question of sleep begins to resolve itself naturally. Not through effort or technique, but through the relaxation that comes from no longer fighting with your experience. When you're not at war with whatever arises in consciousness, when you're not demanding that your thoughts be different or your emotions be other than they are, your nervous system can finally settle into its natural rhythm. This settling happens like a leaf falling from a tree, naturally and without force. You can't make it happen by wanting it or trying harder, but you can create the conditions for it by getting out of your own way, by recognizing that the peace you're seeking is not something you create but something you are when you stop creating unnecessary conflict with reality. The great secret the philosophers discovered is that this peace is not fragile or temporary. It's not dependent on having the right thoughts or feelings or circumstances. It's the very ground of your being, as fundamental as the space in which all experience appears and disappears. Once you recognize this, you can rest in it regardless of what's happening on the surface of your life. This doesn't mean you become indifferent to your human experience or stop caring about your relationships and responsibilities. If anything, it allows you to engage more fully and skillfully because you're no longer dividing your energy between experiencing life and resisting life. You can give yourself completely to each moment because you're no longer holding back part of yourself in fear of what might happen next. Tonight, as these words settle into your understanding, like snow falling on quiet ground, you might notice something shifting in the very texture of your awareness. Where there was once a sense of struggle and effort, there's now a growing recognition of natural ease. Where there was once resistance to whatever was arising in your experience, there's now a gentle curiosity about the endless creativity of consciousness itself. This shift isn't something you need to make happen. It's already happening as the natural result of seeing more clearly. When you understand that you are the sky rather than the weather, that you are the screen rather than the movie, that you are the awareness rather than the content of awareness, everything relaxes into its proper place. The thoughts that seemed so urgent and demanding lose their hypnotic power. The emotions that felt so overwhelming reveal themselves to be temporary visitors in the vast space of your being. The circumstances that appeared to threaten your peace are recognized as simply more content, arising in the infinite openness of consciousness. As this understanding deepens, you discover that rest is not something you achieve, but something you are. Sleep is not something you force, but something you allow. Peace is not something you create, but something you recognize as your most fundamental nature. Always present, always available, always here. In this deepest hour of night, as the world around you settles into stillness, something extraordinary begins to reveal itself. The very quality of your attention starts to transform, not through effort, but through a kind of gentle surrender that happens naturally when you stop trying to be anywhere other than exactly where you are. You might notice that the boundary between yourself and your experience begins to soften. The harsh division between the one who is aware and what is being experienced starts to dissolve into something more fluid, more natural. This isn't a loss of yourself, but a discovery of what you actually are beneath all the layers of identity and story you've carried. The ancient sages spoke of this dissolution not as annihilation, but as homecoming. Like a wave recognizing it was never separate from the ocean, you begin to sense that the awareness you've been identifying as yours is actually the same awareness that animates all of existence. The consciousness looking through your eyes is the same consciousness that moves the stars across the sky, that grows the forests, that beats your heart without your conscious control. This recognition doesn't come through intellectual understanding, but through direct experience. Right now, as you rest in the darkness, you can sense this truth not as a concept, but as a living reality. The awareness that knows you are lying here is not confined within the boundaries of your skin. It's vast, open, without edges or limitations. When you truly see this, the small self with all its worries and concerns doesn't disappear, but it takes its proper place as a temporary expression of something much larger. Your personal history, your individual challenges, your unique personality, all of these remain, but they're no longer mistaken for your essential identity. They become like waves on the surface of an infinite ocean, beautiful and temporary expressions of the depths below. This shift in identity has profound practical implications for how you move through your days and nights. When you know yourself as this vast awareness rather than as a small, separate entity struggling to survive in a hostile world, challenges lose their power to overwhelm you. Difficulties become interesting rather than threatening. Problems become puzzles to explore rather than emergencies to solve. Consider how this applies to the relationship with your own body. Most people experience their body as something they possess, something they live inside of, something that can betray them through illness or injury. But what if your body is actually an expression of the same intelligence that orchestrates the movements of galaxies? What if the breath moving through you right now is the same force that moves through all living beings? When you experience your body this way, a natural reverence arises. You begin to treat it not as a machine that should perform according to your demands, but as a sacred expression of life itself. This reverence naturally leads to better care, not through discipline or willpower, but through genuine love and appreciation for the miracle of embodied existence. The same shift occurs in your relationships with others. When you recognize that the awareness looking through your eyes is the same awareness looking through everyone else's eyes, the artificial boundaries that separate you from others begin to dissolve. This doesn't mean you lose your individuality or become unable to distinguish between yourself and others. It means you recognize the deeper unity that underlies all apparent separation. This recognition naturally gives rise to compassion, not as a moral obligation or spiritual practice, but as the spontaneous response of awareness, recognizing itself everywhere. When you truly see that the person who annoys you, the stranger on the street, the difficult family member, are all expressions of the same consciousness that you are, how could you not respond with understanding and kindness? This compassion extends even to the parts of yourself you've been at war with. The anxious thoughts, the difficult emotions, the physical discomforts, all of these are revealed to be temporary expressions of the same awareness that you are. They're not enemies to be defeated, but aspects of experience to be welcomed with the same openness you would offer to a beloved guest. When this welcoming becomes your natural response to all experience, something magical happens to your capacity for rest. The resistance that usually keeps you awake begins to dissolve. You no longer need to fight with your thoughts or demand that your emotions be different. Everything can be exactly as it is because everything is recognized as an expression of your own deepest nature. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing your capacity to respond skillfully to life's challenges. If anything, it enhances your effectiveness because you're no longer wasting energy on internal resistance. When a situation requires action, you can respond fully and decisively. When a situation calls for patience, you can wait with complete peace. When circumstances demand change, you can adapt fluidly without losing your center. Tonight, as these ancient truths settle into the quiet spaces of your awareness, you've discovered something that countless sleepless souls throughout history have longed to find. Not a technique or method to force rest upon an unwilling mind, but the recognition that peace was never actually absent. It was simply obscured by the very effort to grasp it. The philosophers we've explored together weren't offering you another system to master or practice to perfect. They were pointing to what you already are beneath all the struggle and seeking. This spacious awareness that has been listening, understanding, receiving these words is the same awareness that remains perfectly at rest even when thoughts arise, even when the body feels restless, even when sleep seems distant. As you allow yourself to sink deeper into this recognition, remember that you need to do nothing more than what you're already doing. You need to achieve nothing more than what has already been achieved. The peace you sought was never hiding from you. You were simply looking everywhere except where it actually lives, in the very heart of this moment, in the very center of your being. Rest now in this understanding. Let it carry you wherever you need to go.